The rain hammered the roof of the Green family's suburban Seattle home, but it was the note in Jason Green's hand that drowned out the storm. Nate isn't who he says he is. Check your accounts. The anonymous words burned into his mind, each letter a splinter in the life he thought he knew. At 42, Jason, a steady-handed engineer with eyes that still held a flicker of hope, stood in the dim kitchen, the weight of betrayal settling like damp fog. His wife, Emily, and their 16-year-old daughter, Sophie, were slipping away, captivated by a man who'd slithered into their lives under the guise of a friend. The dining room glowed with the soft light of candles Emily had lit for her book club's guest speaker. Nate Crow, a 38-year-old entrepreneur with a slick smile and a knack for storytelling, held court at the table. Emily, 40, a talented interior designer with a laugh that used to be Jason's alone, hung on his every word. She'd invested $10,000 of their savings into Nate's global publishing startup, a venture he pitched with the fervor of a televangelist. Sophie, her dark hair tucked behind her ears, her phone forgotten for once, grinned at Nate's tales of Silicon Valley deals and startup glory. To them, Nate was a spark of excitement. To Jason, he was a shadow creeping over his family. Jason lingered in the doorway, unnoticed, his work boots still damp from the rain. The chicken on his plate was cold, the mashed potatoes untouched. He'd come home early, hoping to join the conversation, but the air felt thick with exclusion. Emily barely glanced his way, her attention glued to Nate's latest pitch about disrupting the publishing industry. Sophie, usually glued to her phone, nodded eagerly, calling Nate the coolest. Jason's chest tightened. He was fading, a ghost in his own home, his presence reduced to the clink of his fork against the plate. Emily, you sure about this investment? Jason ventured, his voice calm but edged with worry. He adjusted his glasses, a habit when he felt unsteady. Emily waved him off, her eyes still on Nate. Jason, don't be so skeptical. Nate knows what he's doing. Sophie rolled her eyes, her voice sharp. Dad, you're so boring. Nate's actually doing something big. The words stung, sharper than Jason expected. He forced a half smile, the kind he'd mastered over months of feeling like an outsider. But the anonymous note in his pocket, a crumpled slip he'd found in the mailbox that morning, gnawed at him. He'd checked their joint account before dinner. $10,000 was gone, transferred to an unfamiliar account labeled Crow Ventures. Emily hadn't mentioned it. Neither had Nate. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Jason retreated to the guest room. It had become his sanctuary since Emily suggested they focus on personal growth and sleep apart. The room was sparse. A twin bed, a desk, a lamp that flickered when it rained. He sat on the edge of the bed, the note in one hand, his laptop open. The bank's website confirmed his fears. The transfer was real, and Emily had authorized it. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to confront her, to demand answers. But he stopped. Anger wouldn't fix this. He needed a plan. Jason thought of Sophie, her words at dinner echoing like a verdict. She used to run to him with scraped knees, her hero. Now she saw him as a relic, a man who couldn't keep up with Nate's dazzling promises. And Emily, her laughter, once bright and unguarded, had turned polished, reserved for Nate's stories. Jason's jaw clenched. He wasn't just losing his family, he was being erased. He opened a drawer, pulling out a small, faded drawing Sophie had made at 8. A stick figure Jason and Sophie fishing, with "Best Dad Ever" scrawled in crayon. His throat tightened. He folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into his wallet. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting what mattered. Jason booted up his laptop, his fingers moving with quiet purpose. He created a new email account, one Emily wouldn't know. He searched for a private investigator, landing on Ron, a college friend who'd gone into the business. A quick message, Need background on someone named Nate Crow. Urgent. And he hit send. Then he logged into their bank, noting every transaction tied to Nate. He didn't transfer anything yet. That would come later. For now, he was gathering ammunition. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the house creaking under the weight of secrets. Jason leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He could still hear Emily's voice from earlier, praising Nate's vision. He could see Sophie's grin, the one she used to save for him. The note had been a warning, but it was also a spark. Jason wasn't invisible, not yet. He'd been a problem solver his whole life, from fixing bridges to mending Sophie's broken toys. Now he'd solve this. Nate thought he was untouchable, a conman hiding behind charisma. Emily thought she was chasing a dream. Sophie thought she'd found a mentor. They were all wrong. Jason closed his laptop, the screen's glow fading into darkness. The game had begun, and he was already 3 moves ahead. The Seattle dawn broke gray and heavy, but Jason Green was already awake, his laptop casting a pale glow in the guest room's dimness. The anonymous note, "Nate isn't who he says he is," sat on the desk, a silent ally urging him forward. Last night's dinner, with Emily's dismissal and Sophie's sharp words, had hardened his resolve. At 42, Jason wasn't the type to rage or plead. He was an engineer, a man who fixed what was broken with precision, and now he'd rebuild the foundation of his life, one calculated step at a time. He sipped black coffee, the mug's warmth grounding him as he opened a new browser in incognito mode. First, he created a separate bank account under his name, transferring a modest $5,000 from their joint savings. Small enough to avoid Emily's notice, but enough to start. Next, he scanned their financial history, mortgage payments, tax returns. The $10,000 Emily had funneled to Crow Ventures. Every document was uploaded to a cloud folder, password protected and tucked inside another folder labeled Old Tax Receipts. Jason wasn't just covering tracks, he was building a fortress. His phone buzzed, a reply from Ron, the private investigator. Nate Crow, real name Nathan Kelly. History of fraud in Oregon, 2 startups bankrupted. 1 investor sued him for $50,000. Still digging. What's he into with you? Jason's pulse quickened. Nate wasn't just a slick talker, he was a predator. But the real gut punch came in Ron's next line. He's been emailing your daughter about investing her college fund. Watch out. His Sophie was a target. Jason's jaw tightened, the coffee turning bitter in his mouth. He closed the laptop and pulled out the crayon drawing Sophie had made at 8, him and her fishing. Best dad ever in wobbly letters. It was creased but intact, a reminder of why he couldn't falter. He'd lost Emily to Nate's promises, but he wouldn't lose his daughter. Not to a conman. Not to anyone. At breakfast, the kitchen was a battlefield of silence. Emily scrolled through her phone, her coffee untouched, while Sophie shoveled cereal, earbuds in. Jason set his mug down, testing the waters. Sophie, you've been talking to Nate about his business stuff? She shrugged, not looking up. Yeah, he says I could invest my college money. Make it grow, you know? He's legit, Dad. Unlike... Her voice trailed off, but the unspoken jab, unlike you, hung in the air. Jason kept his tone even. Just be careful, okay? Money's tricky. Sophie rolled her eyes. Whatever. You don't get it. Emily glanced up, her voice sharp. Jason, stop smothering her. Nate's mentoring her. She needs that. Mentoring. The word twisted like a knife. Jason nodded, retreating to his coffee. Confrontation would only push them further into Nate's orbit. He needed evidence, not arguments. By midday, he was in his office, a beige cubicle at a civil engineering firm. Between emails, he called the bank, requesting a freeze on their joint credit card due to suspicious activity. The clerk didn't question it. Then he contacted their mortgage lender, ensuring the house title could be transferred to Sophie if needed, a safeguard for her future. Each move was surgical, invisible. Nate might charm his way into their hearts, but Jason controlled the numbers. Ron sent another update that afternoon. A scanned email from Nate to an unknown contact, boasting about tapping a new investor for $20K. The investor was Emily. Worse, Nate had mentioned Sophie's potential contribution in the same thread. Jason's hands shook as he saved the file. This wasn't just about money. Nate was weaving a web and his family was caught in it. That evening, Jason found Sophie in the living room, her laptop open to Nate's flashy Crow Ventures website. He sat beside her, ignoring the instinct to lecture. "Hey, remember that camping trip when you were 10? You caught that trout and we cooked it over the fire." Sophie's eyes flicked up, a ghost of a smile. "Yeah, you burned your finger trying to flip it." "Worth it," Jason said, chuckling. "You were so proud." For a moment, she softened, the wall between them thinning. Then her phone pinged, a message from Nate, and the moment shattered. "Gotta go, Dad. Nate's sending me some investor stuff." Jason watched her leave, the drawing in his wallet heavier than ever. He returned to the guest room, opening a new spreadsheet, exit strategy. Columns for assets, accounts, documents. A row for Sophie, her college fund, her future. Another for Emily, her choices, her consequences. And at the top, in bold, Nate Crow. He emailed Ron again. "Need everything on Nate's current scam, and check if he's targeting other families." If Nate was a predator, Jason would expose him, not just for his family, but for anyone else in his crosshairs. The rain picked up, drumming against the window. Jason leaned back, the spreadsheet glowing on his screen. Emily thought Nate was their ticket to wealth. Sophie thought he was a mentor. They were wrong and Jason would prove it. Not with shouting or ultimatums, but with the quiet power of truth. He was no longer the man they overlooked. He was the one they'd underestimated, and his plan was only beginning. The Seattle sky hung low, a quilt of gray clouds that seemed to press down on Jason Green's shoulders. He stood in his office parking lot, rain misting his glasses, as his phone buzzed with a new email from Ron, the private investigator. "Nate's deeper in than I thought. He's running the same scam on 2 other families. Check the attachment. Proof he's siphoning your wife's money offshore." Jason's breath caught, the weight of Nate's betrayal sinking deeper. At 42, he'd built bridges that withstood storms. But now he was fighting to save his family from a conman's collapse. Back in his cubicle, Jason opened the attachment. A screenshot of Nate's email to an offshore account manager, bragging about securing another $15K from the Greens. The timestamp matched Emily's latest transfer. Worse, a second document showed Nate pitching Sophie's college fund as easy money to a shady investor. Jason's fingers curled into fists, the cheap office chair creaking under his weight. Nate wasn't just stealing. He was targeting his daughter, his 16-year-old Sophie, who still believed the man was her ticket to a brighter future. He saved the files to his encrypted cloud folder, each click a vow to protect what was his. But the anger wasn't enough. He needed to be surgical. He called the bank, confirming the credit card freeze he'd requested yesterday. Then he emailed their lawyer, drafting a request to transfer the house title to Sophie's name, framing it as estate planning. Every move was a brick in the wall he was building, one Nate wouldn't see until it was too late. At home, the air was thick with unspoken battles. Emily was in the kitchen, her laptop open to Nate's Crow Ventures pitch deck, her eyes bright with a dream Jason no longer recognized. Sophie slouched on the couch, texting, her earbuds a barrier against the world. Jason tried to bridge the gap. "Sophie, got a minute?" She pulled one earbud out, her expression wary. "What? Remember that hike we took when you were 9? You were so mad when I wouldn't let you climb that steep trail, but you thanked me later when we found that waterfall." He smiled, hoping to spark something. Sophie's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Yeah, you were all safety first. Kinda annoying. Still am, Jason said, his voice soft. Just be careful with Nate's ideas. Okay? Big promises can hide big risks. Her face hardened. Nate's not like you, Dad. He takes risks. He's going somewhere. She plugged her earbud back in, the conversation dead. Jason retreated to the guest room, the sting of her words lingering. He opened his wallet, touching the faded crayon drawing, Sophie's best dad ever, from years ago. It was his anchor, a reminder of the girl who'd once trusted him. He wouldn't let Nate steal that bond, no matter how deep the conman's hooks were. The next day brought a new shock. Sophie came home late, her backpack slung low, her eyes red. Jason met her at the door. "What's wrong?" "It's nothing," she muttered, but her voice cracked. "Sophie, talk to me." He kept his tone steady, the way he did when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. She hesitated, then spilled. "My friend Jess. She got in trouble. She was selling some of Nate's investment packages to her cousins, and now the cops are involved. I was their dad. I could have been arrested." Jason's heart thudded, but he stayed calm. "You're safe now. Tell me everything." Sophie explained. Jess had been roped into Nate's scam, peddling fake shares for Crow Ventures. A buyer had tipped off the police, and Jess was questioned. Sophie had been at the meetup, unaware it was illegal. Jason drove her to the station to give a statement, his presence a quiet shield. On the way home, he didn't lecture. Instead, he said, "You're smarter than this, sophomore. You know that, right?" She nodded, barely. "I thought Nate was real." "He's good at seeming real," Jason said. "But I'm here. Always will be." For the first time in months, Sophie didn't pull away. She leaned against the car window, her silence softer, less hostile. Jason felt a crack in the wall between them, a chance to rebuild. But Emily was another story. That night, Jason tried to warn her, showing her a bank statement with Nate's transfers. "Emily, he's moving our money offshore. This isn't a business. It's a scam." She scoffed, her arms crossed. "You're jealous, Jason. Nate's building something and you can't stand it. Stop trying to control me." "I'm trying to protect us," he said, his voice low but firm. "Protect?" She laughed, bitter. "You're stuck in your safe little world. Nate's taking us somewhere bigger." Jason let it go. Arguing was pointless. She was too far gone. But her words fueled him. He emailed Ron. "Need more on Nate's other targets. And any dirt on his offshore accounts." If Emily wouldn't listen, he'd make sure the truth was undeniable. The rain returned, a steady drum against the house. Jason opened his spreadsheet, exit strategy, adding new rows. Nate's email screenshots, Sophie's close call, Emily's denial. He wasn't just planning now, he was preparing for war. Nate thought he'd won, charming his way into their lives. Emily thought she was chasing a dream. Sophie was starting to doubt. Jason wasn't the invisible man they assumed. He was the one with the evidence, the one who'd turn their world upside down. And he was ready for the next move. The Seattle rain had softened to a whisper, but inside the Green family's home, a storm was brewing. Jason Green stood in the hallway, clutching a folder of evidence that could shatter the illusion Nate Crow had spun. Tonight was Sophie's 16th birthday, a night meant for celebration, but for Jason, it was the moment to reclaim his family. At 42, he'd spent weeks building a case. Bank records, emails, proof of Nate's fraud, each piece a step toward justice. Now, with the house humming with guests, he was ready to strike. The living room buzzed with laughter, paper streamers dangling from the ceiling. Sophie, in a new dress, grinned as friends snapped photos. Emily, her hair swept up, handed out cupcakes, her smile bright but brittle. Nate, ever the showman, regaled a cluster of book club members with tales of his next big venture. Jason watched from the sidelines, invisible as always, his heart pounding. The folder in his jacket felt like a live wire, its contents enough to end Nate's charade. He'd planned this carefully. No public spectacle, no drama to feed YouTube's algorithms. He'd learned from Ron, his private investigator, that Nate had defrauded 2 other families, siphoning $30,000 combined. The offshore account tied to Crow Ventures held nearly $50,000, half from Emily's transfers. Worst of all, Nate had tried to lure Sophie into his scam, emailing her about investing her college fund. Jason had saved her from that trap, pulling her back after her friend's brush with the law. Tonight, he'd save Emily, too, even if she didn't want saving. Jason caught Sophie's eye across the room. She gave a small wave, her expression softer since their car ride from the police station. That moment, when she'd leaned against the window and let him talk about their old hikes, had cracked the wall between them. He'd reminded her of the dad who'd always been there, and now she was starting to see Nate's shine for what it was. Polished lies. Emily, though, was still blind. Jason approached her in the kitchen, away from the crowd. "We need to talk. Now, it's about Nate." She sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. "Jason, not this again. It's Sophie's birthday. Can't you let it go?" "It's not about me," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about our money, our daughter. Come to the study, please." Reluctantly, she followed, and Jason signaled Sophie to join. The study was quiet, the party's noise muffled behind the door. Jason set the folder on the desk, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. "This is the truth about Nate." He opened it, spreading out the evidence. Bank statements showing $15,000 moved offshore, Nate's email calling Emily an easy mark, a police report linking him to fraud in Oregon. Sophie's eyes widened as she read the email about her college fund. Emily's face paled, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "This can't be real," Emily whispered, but her voice wavered. "He said, he promised, he lied," Jason said, not unkindly. "He's been lying to all of us, but we can stop him." Sophie's voice broke. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought he was cool. I should have listened." She stepped toward Jason, and he pulled her into a hug, her head against his shoulder. For the first time in months, he felt like her father again. Emily sank into a chair, tears brimming. "How could I be so stupid?" "You trusted him," Jason said. "He's good at that. But it's not over. I've already sent this to the police. They're handling it." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. A text from Ron. "Cops have Nate's file. They'll pick him up tonight, post-party. Stay clear." Jason nodded to himself. No drama, no scene. Just justice. They returned to the party, Emily composed but shaken, Sophie sticking close to Jason. Nate was still charming the guests, oblivious to the net closing around him. Jason didn't confront him. He didn't need to. The truth was out, and the wheels were turning. Later, as guests left and Sophie opened her gifts, Jason handed her a small box. Inside was a keychain, a tiny fishing rod, a nod to their old trips. "For when you're ready to make new memories," he said. Sophie smiled, her eyes bright. "Thanks, Dad. I'm ready now." Emily watched, silent, her hands clasped. She'd lost more than money tonight, her trust, her dream. But Jason saw a flicker of the woman she'd been, the one who'd once believed in them. Maybe, in time, she'd find her way back. Outside, the rain had stopped, the air clean and sharp. Jason stepped onto the porch, the folder still in his jacket. He'd protected Sophie, opened Emily's eyes, and set Nate's downfall in motion. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in months, he felt solid, like a bridge rebuilt stronger than before. Nate thought he'd won. Emily thought she'd found a future. Sophie thought she'd lost her dad. They were all wrong, and Jason was just getting started. The Portland skyline shimmered under a rare February sun, and Jason Green, now 43, stood at his apartment window, the Willamette River sparkling below. 3 months had passed since Sophie's birthday, when he'd laid bare Nate Crow's lies in that quiet study, saving his family from a conman's grip. The folder of evidence, bank records, emails, proof of Nate's fraud, had done its work, and Jason had walked away not with vengeance, but with peace. He'd rebuilt what mattered most, not with anger, but with the steady hand of truth. His new life in Portland was simple. A one-bedroom apartment, a drafting table for freelance engineering projects, and a coffee maker that hummed each morning. The guest room in Seattle, with its flickering lamp and lonely nights, was a memory now. He'd left the house to Sophie, the title transferred to her name to secure her future. The divorce papers, signed and filed, had freed him from Emily's orbit, but he didn't hate her. She'd been a victim, too, blinded by Nate's promises of wealth. Jason's fight had never been about destroying her. It was about protecting their daughter and finding his own way forward. Sophie was the light in his new chapter. She spent weekends with him, her laughter filling the apartment as they cooked pancakes or binged old sci-fi movies. The wall between them, built by Nate's charm and her teenage rebellion, had crumbled. That night in the study, when she'd hugged him and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad," had been the turning point. She'd seen Nate for what he was, a fraud who'd nearly cost her everything. And she'd seen Jason for who he was, the father who'd never stopped fighting for her. One Saturday, they sat at a riverside cafe, the air crisp with spring's promise. Sophie sipped a latte, her fishing rod keychain, Jason's birthday gift, dangling from her backpack. "I got accepted to UW," she said, her smile wide. "Environmental science. I want to, fix the planet." Jason grinned, pride swelling. "That's my girl. You'll fix more than the planet." She laughed, then grew quiet. "Dad, I was so dumb about Nate. I thought he was some genius. But you never gave up on me." "Never will," Jason said, his voice steady. "You're stuck with me, kid." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. For a moment, he saw the 8-year-old who'd drawn him as best dad ever. Her crayon fishing scene still tucked in his wallet. That girl was still there, just braver, wiser, and ready to take on the world. Emily's fate was less certain, but Jason didn't dwell on it. She'd stayed in Seattle, her reputation bruised after Nate's scam unraveled. Friends distanced themselves, and her book club disbanded, but she wasn't broken. Ron, the private investigator, had heard she'd enrolled in a business course, determined to rebuild on her own terms. Jason wished her well silently. She'd made mistakes, but so had he, staying silent too long, letting Nate's shadow grow. Forgiveness wasn't loud. It was letting go. Nate, meanwhile, faced the consequences. The police, armed with Jason's evidence, had arrested him quietly after Sophie's party. He'd been charged with multiple counts of fraud, his offshore accounts frozen. Last month, Ron sent a clipping from an Oregon paper. Nate, now Nathan Kelly, had been sentenced to 4 years. The article mentioned other victims, 2 families who'd lost thousands. But Jason's quick action had spared his own from worse. He didn't gloat. Justice wasn't about triumph. It was about balance restored. One evening, Jason packed a box for Sophie. A photo album he'd spent weeks assembling. It held snapshots of their past. Her first bike ride, their camping trips, that trout they'd cooked over a fire. Tucked inside was a letter. "You're my best adventure. I'll always be here, no matter where life takes you." He mailed it, imagining her smile when she opened it. The keychain had been a start. This was a promise. Back in his apartment, Jason opened his laptop, updating his exit strategy spreadsheet one last time. The columns, assets, accounts, Nate's downfall were complete. He added a final note, "Sophie's future, secure." Then he closed the file, archiving it. The plan was done, the bridge rebuilt. He wasn't the invisible man anymore, the one Emily ignored or Sophie dismissed. He was Jason Green, the father who'd stood firm, the engineer who'd fixed what was broken. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the river gold. Jason stepped onto his balcony, the air cool against his skin. He thought of Seattle, of the rain that had marked those dark months. Portland was different, brighter, freer. Emily was finding her path. Sophie was soaring. Nate was a footnote, his lies buried under the weight of truth. Jason didn't need applause or revenge. He had his daughter's trust, a new city, a life carved from his own choices. The rain might return, but he was ready. He'd built something stronger than before, a foundation no storm could shake. And as the stars emerged, he knew the best was yet to come.